From the smoky clubs of Philadelphia to the neon-lit stages of MTV, Cinderella's journey is a tale of grit, reinvention, and the relentless pursuit of rock stardom. Merging in the heart of the glam metal explosion, the band defied expectations with their bluesy edge and raw authenticity, carving out a legacy that would weather both shifting tides of the music industry and their own personal battles. Before they topped the charts and sold out arenas, Cinderella was just another band fighting for a shot but facing rejection, lineup changes, and a scene that didn't quite know what to make of them. Today, let's take a look at Cinderella's first album. The story of Cinderella begins with guitarist and vocalist Tom Keifer, who hailed from the suburbs of Philadelphia. It would be at the age of 8 that he was first inspired by the Monkees, which resulted in him wanting to learn guitar. However, it wasn't always a straight path to music, as another inspiration ended up being magician Doug Henning. That resulted in Keifer trying to become a magician for a few years. Keifer also credited groups like Led Zeppelin, Nazareth, Janis Joplin, Humble Pie, Aerosmith, and UFO for being other huge influences on him. It was in junior high that he started his first band, which did covers, and he played guitar in the group, and they would have each member taking turns singing. The East Coast scene was pretty interesting back then, as bands could attract pretty big audiences and make a lot of money simply by playing cover tunes. One of the bands who succeeded in doing this early on was Twisted Sister. Frontman Dee Snider admitted in the book Nothing But a Good Time that the band, in today's dollars, were pulling in around $370,000 a year before taxes, of course. But for Keifer, he wasn't into the idea, revealing in the same book. It was so lucrative on the East Coast and the cover bands were so popular. It was like living the fantasy without doing the work to create your own music. But Keifer admitted that you kind of had to play cover tunes at your shows in order to get booked, and then you could maybe play a handful of original tunes at the same show. Prior to forming Cinderella, Keifer played in a cover band called Saints in Hell. He was pretty young, still in high school at the time, and he was enrolled in a work-study program. Funny enough, his school thought that he was working a day job, but in reality, he was sleeping during the day and playing clubs 5 nights a week in both Philadelphia and Jersey. He was also doing a lot of partying around this time, and he did struggle with substance abuse. At one point, Keifer contemplated dropping out of high school, but his mother bribed him to stay, promising to give him a Gibson Les Paul, which is something he still owns today. Apart from playing covers, bands on the East Coast scene really had to have a good visual show, and Saints in Hell did. The group's frontman would breathe fire and cut himself on stage with glass. It was sometime in the early 80s, a day before a scheduled gig in Ocean City, Maryland, that Keifer found himself in the bathroom next to a local bassist named Eric Brittingham. Keifer was in the bathroom with one of his bandmates complaining about their bass player when he tapped Brittingham on the shoulder, asking him if he played bass. Brittingham responded that he did, but he didn't have one at the moment. Despite this, Keifer invited him to come jam with the band the next day, and he could use their current bassist equipment. They jammed on some Kiss covers, and Saints in Hell now had their new bass player. But not too long after that, Keifer started to grow disillusioned with his life, thinking that he was really going nowhere. He temporarily moved back in with his parents, he confronted his substance abuse issues, and got a few day jobs, one of which was at a place called Photomat, picking up film that needed to be developed, and he even walked racing horses, something that I didn't even know was a thing, but apparently they're called hot walkers. It was during this period in his life he started to write some more songs, and it was now 1983. Keifer and Brittingham started the outfit Cinderella. Keifer fronted the group in addition to playing guitar, and he became the group's principal songwriter. But perhaps one of the strangest parts of their early history is the name they chose, Cinderella. It gives off the vibes that the band was soft, but Keifer explained to the LA Times why they used the moniker, revealing, "We found the name when we were looking through an HBO guide one day. We saw the movie Cinderella listed and thought it would be a good name for us. We wanted something that didn't have any heavy metal associations. Cinderella doesn't play what you'd expect a band called Cinderella to play." The group was allowed to rehearse in the upper story at a Somerdale, New Jersey joint called the Galaxy Club. Keifer's days were pretty packed. He'd work his day job from 5 in the morning all the way to 5 p.m., and then afterwards he'd go to rehearse with the band. They ended up writing about 24 songs, and then they booked some studio time to record some demos that they were going to shop around to record labels. According to Brittingham, the band spent nearly a year writing before they even played their first gig. Helping round out the lineup was drummer Tony Destra and guitarist Michael Kelly Smith. Smith at one point even auditioned for Kiss and still had Gene Simmons' number. In fact, while a lot has been written about how instrumental Jon Bon Jovi was in discovering the group, it was actually Gene Simmons who tried to land the band a record deal first. The members even went to Simmons' home in New York, but they weren't on the same wavelength. Simmons wanted to sign the group to a production deal where he would write Cinderella songs, but Brittingham revealed that the songs Gene came up with were really bad, so they passed on the opportunity. The band started playing some live shows, and they were doing a weekly residence at the Galaxy on Saturday nights. Despite playing to small crowds, Keifer electrified audiences, and soon enough record label people started showing up, but there was a problem. They weren't able to land a major recording contract deal because, according to Cinderella's manager Larry Mazer, the labels had issues with Keifer's raspy vocals. Mazer recalled in Nothing But a Good Time, "I thought his voice was a plus because at that point in time, Aerosmith had just reformed and had come out with Done With Mirrors, which was not a great record because they were still in their heroin phase. AC/DC was in that period of Fly on the Wall, Flick of the Switch, Who Made Who, which weren't great AC/DC records. And here's Cinderella, right down the middle of Aerosmith and AC/DC. The closest the band got to being signed was with Atlantic Records at this point, but the label instead chose to sign the group Savatage, thinking they had a more promising future. In the meantime, Cinderella became local celebrities when, believe it or not, they appeared in a hot dog commercial. If you're wondering how this happened, the owner of the hot dog joint saw the band play a show and simply asked them to be in the ad. The band's luck was about to change though. It would be at one of their gigs that Jon Bon Jovi was in attendance and took an immediate liking to the band. Bon Jovi was in town making his second record, 7800 Degrees Fahrenheit, and keep in mind Bon Jovi wasn't a multi-platinum band just yet. He ended up pushing Derek Shulman from Polygram Records to check the band out, and the group wasn't even aware that John was talking to his label about potentially signing the group. They just thought he liked the band. At the insistence of John, Shulman came down and saw the band's live show. John was quoted at the time as saying, "I was recording in Philadelphia at the Warehouse and hanging out at night at the Empire Rock Club where I heard Cinderella play, and they just blew me away, especially Tom, who has great charisma and writes great songs." He told the manager that he wasn't impressed with the group's guitar player and drummer. If they could get some better musicians, including a more flashy guitar player, then he would offer Cinderella a $30,000 production deal that would last about 3 months. Now, I want to point out some interviews claimed the production deal was over 6 months. Keifer wasn't necessarily bothered by the suggestion because at this point in Cinderella's career, he was already having musical disagreements with his drummer and guitarist. Keifer ended up getting rid of drummer Tony Destra and guitarist Michael Kelly Smith, and those two guys went on to form Britny Fox, who went on to have their own level of success. Sadly, drummer Tony Destra was killed in 1987 due to a car accident. As Cinderella turned their attention to recruiting 2 new musicians, they did look at future Skid Row guitarist Dave Snake Sabo, who auditioned for the group, but instead they went with Jeff LaBar. The reason they chose LaBar was for 2 reasons. One was that Sabo was buddies with Jon Bon Jovi and had a bit of an attitude, and number 2, he was incessantly calling them asking if he got the gig. LaBar had played in a band called White Fox that opened for Cinderella a number of times in Jersey, so they already knew him and he just seemed like a better fit. Polygram soon signed the band and a label deal followed by April of '85. Cinderella rounded out their lineup for their first album with drummer Jody Cortez. Their record deal was said to have been an 8-album deal at the time. The band hit the studio with producer Eric John, who the band credited as giving them success early in their career. John had previously worked with Led Zeppelin, Rod Stewart, as well as the Rolling Stones. They spent 12 hours a day with the producer in the studio, 6 days a week over a 4.5-month period, and spent about $200,000 on their first record. Jon Bon Jovi even appeared on 2 songs, doing background vocals on Nothing for Nothing and In From the Outside. Released in April of '86, Cinderella's debut record, Night Songs, struggled out of the gate. thanks in part to the single Shake Me, which was sent out to album-oriented rock, but it failed to chart. Even in Philadelphia, which the band played a lot in the early days, they weren't really embraced by the city. Manager Larry Mazer told the Philadelphia Daily News, "The Philadelphia media has basically ignored the band. You don't hear them on radio because the programmers are reaching into upper demographics with soft rock instead of the kids who like their music hard." Keifer added that Cinderella never felt like it fit the mold of the music scene in Philly, which gave rise to groups like Hall & Oates and the Hooters. Polygram opted not to print lyrics for their debut record, not wanting to give ammunition to Tipper Gore's newly established organization, the Parents Music Resource Center, who often misinterpreted lyrics. Keifer recalled to the Philadelphia Inquirer, "Push Push and Shake Me might be sexually suggestive, but in a clever way because of those two songs, which to me are the least lyrically important on the album. The good stuff that kids should have read couldn't be printed." He added that due to the band's name and his own beliefs, he never wrote songs about drugs because kids are impressionable. Perhaps not helping initial album sales was the cover art, which seemed to do a disservice to the type of music that Cinderella played. The original cover had night songs written in water on a piece of glass. The band had an alternative cover planned, but the label initially rejected it because it didn't have any of the band members on it. They ended up shooting a new cover with the members on it. As for the band's clothing choices on the album cover, Keifer claimed they were trying to look like Aerosmith, and that's how Aerosmith dressed at the time. As for the photo shoot, he recalled, "We shot the cover in the historic district of Philadelphia, but the most interesting thing that I remember is that the album was called Night Songs, and Mark scheduled the shoot for daytime. I kept saying to him, that's not going to look right. And he said, I shoot day for night. I didn't know what the fuck that meant. I just trusted him because I kind of liked this guy right off the bat. I thought he was a straight up cat." And sure enough, when we got the pictures back, it looked like it was nighttime. Cinderella finally caught a break when their follow-up single, Nobody's Fool, landed on both radio and MTV. The song peaked at number 13 on the Hot 100 chart and number 25 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. Mazer credited MTV for being a huge factor in breaking the band, with him also revealing that Shake Me and Nobody's Fool cost the band about $60,000 to film the videos for. The song, while not written specifically about a particular person, dealt with falling out of love. The band also had another charting single with Somebody Save Me, and they also wrote more charged songs like Back Home Again, which was said to have been about the Vietnam War. With the rise of the Parents Music Resource Center, Polygram vetoed including a lyric sheet in the band's first album, fearing unwanted attention from the wrong groups. Keifer told the LA Times, "This isn't hardcore, sinister metal, just it's not angelic either. Some of the songs are a bit sexually suggestive, but they're not that bad. The stuff Prince sings is much worse." As the band turned their attention to tour for their first major album, they were without a drummer. Initially, Polygram was pushing for former Kiss drummer Eric Singer, who was in Lita Ford's group at the time, but he wasn't interested. LeBar was a fan of a band named Chastain and knew of their drummer Fred Coury. Coury knew that Cinderella was looking for a drummer, but he didn't know anything about the band. He initially blew them off thinking it was an all-girl group. It was upon listening to their first album that he changed his mind. In a funny twist of fate, Coury had signed a Chastain record for LeBar about 1 year prior to him joining Cinderella. Cinderella's first major arena tour was opening for David Lee Roth. As Night Songs continued to climb up the charts, the band started to get hit with restrictions from Dave's people. LeBar recalled in Nothing But a Good Time, "The better our album did, the more restrictions they tried to put on us. At one point, Tom was told that he was not allowed to speak in between songs. We pointed out how ridiculous that was, so then they said, okay, you're allowed to say the name of the city and the name of the song." Cinderella soon jumped to a bigger tour linking up with Bon Jovi for when they put out their Slippery When Wet album, and that further catapulted their album up the charts. Cinderella also learned something valuable on that first tour, how to treat other bands. Bon Jovi showed them true hospitality, and it was on that tour the band befriended comedian Sam Kinison, who was friendly with a lot of the hard rock bands at the time. He was originally supposed to appear in the video for Somebody Save Me, but the guys from Bon Jovi stepped in at the 11th hour and helped the band out. Cinderella's debut album went gold in just 12 weeks, and it became the biggest debut record that any band had put out since Boston almost a decade prior. The album ended up going 3 times platinum. Executives at Polygram chalked up another factor to Cinderella's success: their willingness to do interviews, TV shows, meet and greets, and just generally make themselves accessible. A spokesman for their label told the Philadelphia Inquirer, "You won't believe how many acts there are who come in here with an attitude. Either the band or the manager says, we don't do in stores, we don't do TV talk shows, we don't do this or that. It cripples the promotion of the album right from the start." But Cinderella wasn't free from controversy on their first major tour. They did end up getting picketed by some ignorant pro-censorship types at a show in Corpus Christi, Texas. The LA Times were along for the ride, writing, "Apparently they figured Cinderella, like the heavy metal band stereotype, was a quartet of druggies preaching the turn-on ethic in concert." Keifer was quoted in the story as saying, "I said, wait a minute. I told them that we don't do drugs and that you won't find one lyric on any of our songs saying we do drugs or telling people to do drugs. You won't hear it on the albums, and we don't do that kind of stuff on stage. I said you're picketing the wrong concert." The LA Times remarked in 1986, "What makes success of Night Song so impressive is that new heavy metal bands rarely sell very well. In fact, even veteran heavy metal bands aren't selling well these days." Now, I do want to say that the term heavy metal was used by a lot of the press in describing Cinderella in the 80s, something that irked Keifer, who told the Detroit Free Press, "We're more of a rock and roll band." He's frequently cited blues-based groups like Led Zeppelin, the Stones, and Aerosmith as some of his biggest influences. Despite the strong commercial performance, critics didn't really praise the band. Rolling Stone panned their debut album for, and I quote, "too much pose, not punch." But the reviews did little to bother the members, with Keifer telling the Spokesman Review, "I've never ever read a bad review about us or another band that I thought was fair. It's mostly a bunch of cheap shots." Even after Night Songs proved to be a success, the band was still getting ignored in markets like Philadelphia. Keifer told the Philadelphia Inquirer, "They have a certain sound that they want to maintain. Even with a gold album and number 13 on the charts, they're still not playing us." Even as trends shifted and challenges mounted, Cinderella stayed true to their roots, leaving a legacy that's often misunderstood but impossible to ignore. Whether you see them as underdogs or icons, one thing's for sure: Cinderella's music and their spirit continued in the subsequent years and also resonated with fans who knew that sometimes the most enduring magic comes from those who never quite fit the mold.